Hi, everybody. My name is Katrina, and I'm the events coordinator for the Toadstool Bookshops in Keene, uh, in conjunction with Peterborough and Nashua, New Hampshire. And I'm joined today by author Julia McKenzie Munemo, the author of The Bookkeeper, a memoir of race, legacy, and love, which you can find at all three of our bookstores in Keene, Peterborough, and Nashua, and online at toadbooks.com. If you're curious, you should be. Check it out. Read it if you haven't. It's an excellent work of memoir. Julia, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah. Hi, you guys. I'm Julia. I'm excited that you're here. I am planning to read to you a little bit today. I don't know. Katrina, is there anything specific you want me to introduce myself about?
No, just if no, I mean, we're all familiar. Hopefully, we're all familiar with your work. Julia's memoir is a story of herself. It's a story of her father. It's a story of a legacy. And I would love for you to take it away.
Okay, great. I'm gonna let Carter join us too before I start. Hi everybody. It's lovely to see you, or to see the pictures of you, or to see your names. I'm going to start by reading to you from my book, The Bookkeeper, a memoir of race, love, and legacy. And I'm going to read for a little while. I'm going to skip around a little bit, and then there's going to be time for questions if anybody wants to ask questions. Okay, here we go. Prologue. I'd like to show you a snapshot of my family. It will reveal a fact you need to know. Otherwise, what follows doesn't matter. No, that's wrong. It does matter, but without knowing this, without seeing this Polaroid I keep on my fridge, you won't know why it matters quite so much to me. We're all dressed up for a wedding. Our elder son is 4, and he leans against his dad's hip, squinting, unsmiling into the camera in a sharp seersucker suit. The baby is 1, and I'm holding him. His considerably more rumpled seersucker is all bunched up around his neck, and he looks cross. I want to reach back through time and pull it down. Let him breathe a little better. My husband and I stand a hairbreadth apart. There's a slash of green grass hill between us. My pale white skin looks washed out in the October sun, but my thick brown hair falls nicely against my face, and my rust-colored dress is fabulous, and I'm smiling at the camera. My husband isn't smiling, but not because he's unhappy. He never smiles for a picture. His suit is dark gray, and his tie matches my dress, and he looks fabulous too. I don't know if it's the quality of the film or the slant of the sun, but even after all these years on the fridge, in this picture, the shades of light and dark on his black skin are perfectly rendered. There it is, the fact you need. Why didn't I just come out and say it? I'm a white woman married to a black man. Our children are mixed race. My intention wasn't to fool you, but to take you there slowly. Normally, you just see us on the street and know. You decide whatever it is you're going to decide. And this is a story about how some things take time to come clear. Chapter 1. Late one night, the winter our children are 9 and 12, I settle on the green couch in the den of our rural New England farmhouse, holding an old softback book in shaking hands. Its title is The Wrath of Chain, and the teaser copy promises the most shocking portrayal of slavery ever written. But the image under those words reveals a tale as old as time. There's a tall, muscular Black man trying to pull his wrists apart, but his chains don't allow it. He's got no shirt on and his pants are unbuttoned. A white woman in a yellow dress gazes up at his face. I keep looking at the author's name and trying to pull a memory from the distance. I know it's one of my father's pseudonyms, printed there on the cover of this thick piece of pulp, but I can't remember ever hearing it spoken out loud. Tonight, with my family sleeping upstairs, I open it for the first time. My father wrote this book, and I know very little about my father. Right away, I see the name of my mother's mother penciled in the right-hand corner of the first page. It's handwriting that brings back birthday cards and grocery lists, handwriting I haven't seen since childhood. My father's mother-in-law didn't just keep this book he wrote, she marked it as hers, laid claim to his work, even when it was slavery porn. Her tidy name in the corner of that brittle yellow page softens me to the book, softens me to my dad. It allows me to begin. The young Black man sat for a long time within sight of the house of the overseer. It was almost morning when he first stirred, changing from a sitting to a kneeling position beneath a large cypress tree hung with Spanish moss like a shroud. I read. These are the first words of my writer fathers I've ever read. The chorus of spring stars was still loud in eulogy in the heavens, I read. Loud in eulogy. I run my eyes over the phrase again, there at the bottom of this first page. It's not so bad, I tell myself. I can do this. It's time to do this. But then there are torn clothes. There is a wide forehead. There is a thick chest. There is Chain, speechless and superhumanly strong, a slave with sex appeal. His large Black nostrils flared and his heart pumped fury through the veins Iwana had given him. The son of Iwana and the high medicine stood in the Louisiana night and felt a great pounding beneath his forehead and behind his eyes. He remembered the white woman who was asleep not 50 feet from where he stood and tasted the heavy saliva that was collecting on his tongue. When Chain finds that woman, her white fingers run over his coal black skin before he takes her head in his huge hand, grasping it like a fruit to fling her to the ground by it. He is an animal, this man with a vaguely African sounding mother. He is an animal, this man in Louisiana where the high medicine made him and not a mortal father. I can't understand why this man is shown to be an animal in these opening pages. The white woman he's come for doesn't see yet that he's here to kill her. She thinks he's looking for something else. She lifted her nightdress up to her thighs and said, "Gonna get me some poison ivy like as not, but it's gonna be worth it, ain't it, you?" And I have to close down a memory that threatens to rise up. A story about a woman my father had sex with in the woods one night, how she became covered in a rash from poison ivy afterwards, how he wasn't allergic to it. And I give my head a shake, remind myself why I'm here, look back at the book. He knelt, took her neck in one powerful hand, and began to choke the amazed, half-naked, throbbing woman. Her eyes swelled in her head, and a strange, small sound left her throat. And when he stood up, still holding her by the neck, she was dragged up with him. Her nightdress fell, covering her body again. She shook violently for a moment and then died, a foot off the ground, held in the powerful grip of the infuriated slave. At first, I sit dumbstruck and wonder what my tidy wasp of a grandmother thought when she read her son-in-law's words, how Joan McKenzie from Albany, New York, felt about writing her name in that book after all. Then I wonder what it takes to dream up that violence. What parts of a person have to be accessible for him to reach in and find that? How the plot the author puts down on the page is informed by the contents of his heart. I think about my family sleeping above me, and I put the book down. I climb the stairs and creep into first one kid's room and then the others. I linger as long as I can, press my lips onto warm foreheads until their bodies shift and resettle. Stand in the hallway and listen to them breathe. Worry about what I have done, opening this door. About what I will tell them when they ask where they come from, who their grandfather was. Then I climb into the bed I share with my husband and lie as still as possible. I don't want to wake him. I don't want to ask him to hold this truth with me. I don't want to burden him with these fears. I lie as still as possible in the bed I share with my husband and wonder how my father's imagination could have been so filled with racial stereotypes about couplings like my own. I lie as still as possible and think about how much I want to crawl out of my skin, out of my marriage from the guilt I feel. Because if this is who my father was, who am I? I'm now going to skip way ahead. You can see I'm skipping most of the book because we're all stuck at home right now, and I would really like to be traveling. So if only in our imaginations, I'm going to bring us to Rome. I was lucky enough to take a research trip to Rome where my parents lived before they were married. But my mother left my father there thinking the relationship was over, and he wooed her back in part through a lot of letters that he sent to her. Those letters, some of them handwritten, some of them typed, feature in the chapter I'm about to read. But to catch you up a little bit, it's also important for you to know that my father not only wrote slavery porn, and that's a story I tell in this book, and I also tell my own love story and the story of raising my mixed race children. But I also tell the story of my father's mental illness. He committed suicide the year I was 5. So by the time of this trip to Rome, I had done a lot of work about all of those things, but I hadn't yet read the letters that my mom had given me some years before. So I'm going to read to you from chapter 45, somewhat close to the end. On my 3rd morning in Rome, I wake up early and spread my father's letters out on the bed in front of me. I hope that maybe without a family coming home at the end of each day, without the need to put on the mask I wear after the hardest days, I'll be able to face my father's words in Rome. I reread the typed letters first to get a sense of his letter writing rhythm. It's different from his novel writing rhythm. And when I feel I have it down, have his voice in my head, I unfold the first handwritten note in the stack. I find after a moment that though it takes time and concentration, I can decipher his script now. In Rome, I can be patient with who my father was. This river lined with trees is not for you and me. he writes to my mother in a letter dated Tuesday. And of course, he's talking about the Tiber. He wrote about it in one of his typed letters too, and I know now how it dominates this city, carves it into shapes. I've walked along it a little bit each day. What is for you and me is clenched here in this fist, this raw stone of my engraving. I think he's talking about his writing, about making a life with his words, but I can't be sure. It seems he's being intentionally cryptic, almost like he's playing the part of an intellectual. So after an hour spent deciphering this letter set on the banks of the river, after discovering that I will be able to read the rest of these handwritten words, I decide to leave them for a time. I need fresh air. I need to see the river for myself. I need to stretch my legs. I need breakfast. I need to step away from this bed with visions of what is and is not clenched there in my dad's fist. If I'm avoiding him and his words isn't something I try to discern, I just pull on my spring jacket, wrap a scarf around my neck, and head out. I know from his typed letters that Dad walked along the Tiber on Christmas Eve and that he felt something on that walk I would call illness, even though no one in my family thinks he was sick so early. I know from his typed letters that he saw these sycamore trees I'm walking under now, that he stood under the tunnel they create, these trees whose leaves drop into the water on the far side of this stone wall. I lean on the wall now and wonder if he leaned here too, as he thought that these trees were not for him and my mom. The castle St Angelo is across from me, quiet in the morning, and there's very little traffic on the street behind me. Words from Dad's letters circle through my head, ones about the itch he felt as he walked along the pathway, the itch behind his ear that felt liquid to him, as if it were the place where my brain seeps out, he wrote, and how it made him think of Van Gogh, how it made him compare himself to Vincent van Gogh. He was comparing himself to Vincent van Gogh in 1967, 10 years before his breakdown. I just think he was sick longer than we knew. I turned to my right and set out along the sidewalk, similar to the sidewalk that circles Central Park, a wall on one side, a street on the other. There's freedom in having no destination, no one expecting me, but there's also fear in it. I look behind me to see if anyone's following, and when I turn back, secure that I'm alone, 3 bright green birds fly toward me from across the river. They flutter in my face for a moment, so close I have to stop walking. So close I want to stop walking. They land in the tree above me. One goes into a hole in the thick branch that arcs above the sidewalk, and I can't see it anymore. One perches farther away on the street side, standing watch, and one sits just above my head and peers at me, unmoving. We have a staring contest, me and this bright green tropical bird in Rome. I want to pull out my camera and record these birds for Ngoni and the kids. And I will do that in a minute. But right now, this bright green bird, bigger than a blue jay and with a much longer tail and a black ring around its neck, a small red curved beak, is keeping its eye on me, and I won't break the spell. Rome is a place to get metaphysical, my friend texted me last week as I sat hunched in a chair by the departure gate at Logan. I had made it that far, but when they called us to start boarding, I was stuck in my seat. How did I think I could fly away from my family and spend a week alone in a city I didn't know? I considered walking back to my car. Thought I might be developing a fever. Steph said the angel on top of the Castle St Angelo was all about the past and the future, and that he would protect me. When I didn't reply for a while, she added, "You also know your dad's going to be around, so I feel like you're pretty covered." Then she offered to talk to the police in Italian if I got arrested, forcing me to laugh out loud, stand up, and join the line to board. So as I stare into the eyes of that big green bird along the banks of a river I know my father walked, does it occur to me that this bird is protecting me or telling me something or speaking to me from the beyond? Maybe. Rome is a place to get metaphysical, a place where the past and the future can coexist, which may be why, after a minute of making eye contact with a bird, of feeling suddenly less alone in Rome, I head back to my hotel. The pile of letters is still on the bed, and I know now that it's time to finish them. I came here to find my father, and these letters are one of my only windows. So I open the shutters, change into my sweatpants, and sit on the bed to read them all. I have just decided not to whore again, Dad writes in a letter dated Wednesday. And I startle to realize he's talking about chain. I've been so wrapped up in another book that he wrote. I almost forgot he wrote his first Slavers in Rome too. I'm ashamed, yes, though not for the conventional understanding of selling out, he wrote. What is he ashamed of then? Stereotyping Black men's sexuality or white women's attraction? Commodifying a love that in 1967, just months after the Loving versus Virginia decision, is still scandalous? Or is he ashamed that it occurred to him to do it in the first place? Is he ashamed of his own racialized sexual fantasies? Or am I just grasping, just reading meaning into words he didn't intend for me? Was he just ashamed not to be confronting his art as he'd promised my mother he would? There's no way to know. Dad doesn't finish the thought. In a letter dated Thursday, my dad writes to my mom that he wants to do one small thing, a raw gem of my own force to be hewn by my own craft with something enduring for you. But he can't. He says so himself. Today I have been comforted with the schlock, the superficial use of my chosen craft. I stumble to think that my father was comforted writing about a Black man strangling a white woman who had forced him to carry out sexual favors. I stumble to realize that this work, writing Slavers, was a refuge for him. It comforted him to write this shit as he struggled through a lonely Thursday in Rome. It's what comforted him the rest of his life. What does it mean that my white father took refuge in imagining the lives of Black slaves, of building complex sex lives for Black men? What does it mean that when he needed to find an escape, the route he chose to take was the creation of characters from a racial other? As these familiar questions spin, I put the letter down and turn on my laptop, pull up the website for the magazine I freelance for, and find the excerpt we published of Claudia Rankin and Beth Lafreda's book about the racial imaginary. I need to remind myself of their words. I need their analysis to remind me that I'm not in this alone. Rankin and Lafreda bring up the common question about whether writers of one race can or should write from a different racial other's point of view, but they don't answer it. They're not here to absolve. Rather, they point out that this isn't the question to start with. It is to ask instead why and what for, not just if and how. What is the charisma of what I feel estranged from, and why might I wish to enter and inhabit it, they ask. What was the charisma of what my father felt estranged from? Why did entering and inhabiting the life of an enslaved Black man offer him refuge over and over and over again? And what, I wonder from my small hotel room in Rome, are the consequences of this racial imaginary serving as the lens through which so many white people see the world? I will stop there.
That was very powerful.
Thank you.
I appreciated that you chose to take a selection from the end of the book that juxtaposed your father's his fiction work, the things that he published under his pseudonyms with his own personal writings. I think that that's very poignant. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Folks, there we go. Nancy Jackson says that was very nice. Thank you very much. Folks, if you haven't used the chat function before, there's a chat function right down here at the bottom of your screen. Please click on that if you have any questions and you'd like to ask them. I have a question. It's a little bit more general.
Go ahead.
Did you think when you were writing this and looking into your father's work and your father's life, did you think that there would be quite so much relevance to you examining your own role as a white woman with this legacy in today's cultural setting?
I mean,
Not
there's a way in
irrelevant, but I just feel
right,
like 2020 especially has been more in the news for white people to do the work for ourselves, for our loved ones.
Yeah. I mean, that was slightly less true when I was writing, but I think there's a way in which that's the reason I was looking at his work, right? I was starting to realize that the only way that I could understand my own role in my family as a white woman, as someone who carries this legacy with me into the family, was to understand where I came from, right? And so, did I know it would be relevant? Yes, absolutely. I think, sort of another way of maybe asking that question is like, if I had married a white man and had white children, would I still have needed to do this work? And I would like to say that the answer is yes. I'm not sure it would have resulted in a book because the central irony of my own life and the world that my father wrote about would not have been there. But that wouldn't have made the work any less necessary. Although I don't know if I would have come to it, right? This is a question that I think white people have to be asking themselves right now. Sort of what pushes us to look at our own histories and who we are. And in my case, it was my personal, my family and my journey and the things that were happening, we can talk about this if it comes up, but sort of the things that were happening in the country that were, not new, but covered by the media in a different way, sort of forcing us to wake up and take our blinders off. I read a lot in the book about the blinders that I was wearing for a long time. Yeah.
Thank you. Folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to turn on.
Katrina, we're losing you, I think, unless you're losing me. No. I think Katrina's Wi-Fi is a little funky. So if anyone has a question, maybe turn on your camera or unmute yourself, and we would love to hear from you. Was that what you were going to say, Katrina?
Yes, sorry. Thank you.
Can you hear my voice now?
Yes.
We sure can.
I don't really have a question. I'm just saying this is powerful and beautifully written.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really touched. So I'm going to buy your book.
Oh, I'm thrilled to hear it. I wish I could sign it and hug you.
Where do you live? Oh, you don't live in New England anymore?
I do. I live in Massachusetts.
Okay.
So I do live in New England for sure, but
I live obviously I live near the Toadstool bookstore. So anyway, I'm so glad that I tuned in and I'm definitely going to get the book. And I mean, we're all at a point, where we're trying to find what we can do to help the world be more loving and less racially biased. And it's hard when we live this sort of installated white life.
Yeah.
That's
agreed. It is hard. And it's hard to find our way. And I think there's a way in which that's why I wrote this book, was to sort of, I needed, that was the organizing principle for my journey. And then, you know, now it can be, I have a friend who said, you know, she said, you went into the belly of your family's beast and came out bloodied to show the rest of us how, which
Yeah.
was, that was a meaningful response for me.
All right. Well, thank you. And
Thank you. Thank you for
so,
tuning in.
you're very welcome.
In conjunction kind of with that, Cecile asks, when you say blinders, what exactly do you mean?
Yeah.
What are blinders?
So I think, you know, as a white woman living in this country, even in my mixed race family, I was, and I still am, I shouldn't even speak in the past tense. White privilege sort of puts blinders on us, the way horses wear blinders, right? We don't have to see everything. We don't have to, we have the privilege of keeping ourselves naive and sheltered. And so when I talk about wearing blinders, what I talk about in the book a lot is the sort of painful process of pulling off my blinders. And so in my case, you know, my children are now 15 and 18 almost. But at the time that I was working on the book, they were much younger. My eldest son was turning 12 the summer that Tamir Rice, the November that Tamir Rice was killed. And Tamir Rice was 12 when he was killed by the police in Ohio. And I think that event woke me up to the possibility of my own children's mortality. And I think that as a white woman living in, you know, rural Massachusetts, I was able to sort of delude myself that my kids were safe. Like, you know, we live in the North, we're safe. And that event really shook me. I mean, it really, I think it shook the world, but it shook me out of that naivete that I had carried my whole life. This belief that's just like, because we live in a small town, or because I am white, or for whatever reason, my children will be safe, when in fact, my children are growing into Black men in the United States, and there's no safety in that. And so I had to remove my blinders to see that truth. And I think that, you know, I don't know if I can say that all white people wear blinders, but I think a lot of us do. And it's possible for me to operate with them still, you know, when I'm out in the world. So, Cecile, I don't know if that answers your question. I hope it does.
I think it's very true that especially around here in rural New England, if we don't see it, it's not happening.
Yeah.
And whether or not we understand that cognitively, we internalize that. I'm so sorry for you having to go through that at the same time in your own way. I mean,
that's very nice of you. I don't, you know, my story isn't unique, right? Every mother of every Black child in this country feels this way. I have a different perspective, although the same perspective of many white women too. But I mean, you know, I never want people to feel like they need to pity me. I am totally honored to be the mother of the children that I am the mother of, and I couldn't be happier with who they are. And I feel like every day is a gift that I get to spend with them. And so I never want anyone to feel like they have to sort of console me for my plight. That's not how I feel at all. It's just more about being aware, and, you know, as much for them, right? We all need to be made aware of the world that we're in. So my older son now is going to be heading off to college, and he needs to think about all the things that means, leaving this sort of sweet enclave where we live and where everyone knows him and where the world feels pretty safe. And who knows where he'll go and what world he'll enter. So these are all things we all need to be thinking about.
If we all continue to think about it, and we all continue to do what we can in our own lives, eventually that world that he goes into is going to be a much safer one. I
hope.
truly believe that, and I want that for him. Um,
Me too.
Going back to sort of your father and that whole narrative, that aspect, in families, when a loved one passes away before we're born or when we're very small, it's easy to grow up with this kind of idea in your head that may or may not be what that person actually was. And I feel like that first chapter you read was perfectly exemplary of, oh my God, here's this image kind of burning and something else is rising from it. Would you care to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, say more about what you mean. Like
So,
how, when someone is,
so growing up, did you have a certain idea of who your father was?
yeah,
Having lost him at such a young age in a
yeah.
way that many other children can relate to, but also many other can't. And knowing, oh yeah, my dad was an artist, he was a creative type, and having this idea of him, and then suddenly finding this work that he had done that was antithetical to things that you felt and believed in, something that was so jarring to the life that you were living, um, and something that probably deeply affected you in a far more personal way that we can discuss in a digital author event, and which is why we should all read the book. Um, um,
Well,
yeah,
sure. I think, yeah, I think the question that you're asking is sort of about the image that we have,
yeah,
that we form of someone who has passed when we were very young, right? So, and you know, the who I thought my dad was versus who I came to understand him to have been after all the research that I did. And yes, absolutely. I grew up with stories of him, and they were all about how he was, charming and funny and handsome. And there were some critical stories, right? I allude to his tendencies to be a bit of a womanizer. There were stories about that too, but I definitely had the sense that he was sort of larger than life, magnanimous, and so in that way, that a person that you never really knew becomes sort of mythical, right? And so I write in the book about his height. I always believed he was 6'3", and for some reason this number mattered a lot to me, right? That he was that tall and like that handsome, and he just could have been a great writer. I always believed as a child, if he had just lived longer, or if he just hadn't been ill, if he just hadn't had a breakdown. Um, and then, doing research, I learned a lot of things that brought him back down to size, including that he was 6'1", which, doesn't seem like a lot. It's only 2 inches, but it had a huge, that detail had a bigger effect on me than some of the other things that I discovered about him. It felt very, it served as a metaphor for like literally bringing him back down to size, making him a fallible person who, just like all of us, made mistakes, made choices that I am sorry he made. And so learning that allowed me to sort of crack the veneer a little bit, and look at, read his books with a more critical eye, look at his medical records with more, more empathy on one hand, but also more sense that, yeah, he was flawed, just like the rest of us. So yes, by the end, I will say that now I feel like I really understand who he was. I feel like I really now know him. And that was a surprise. I didn't expect to come away feeling that kind of satisfaction. I was like, yeah, I'll figure out sort of why he was a racist or whatever, but I'm not gonna like make progress in my relationship with him because he's dead. But as it turned out, I did. So it's
oh,
a
that's
little,
huge.
um,
um, So Susan asks, wondering about how your husband and children feel about this book and how they might feel about your dad. Did you have tough conversations? How did you approach those tough conversations with them?
mhm, mhm. Um, so my husband was, from the beginning, supportive and engaged. He didn't read the manuscript until pretty late. Um, and there was a while where that was making me quite nervous. I think, I think that it was not an easy task for him to come to that. Once he did read I didn't start shopping the book around until he had read it. So once he did read the manuscript and he gave me his support, sort of, I felt much relieved. One of the things that I do in the book that isn't hinted at all in the selections that I read is that my husband is from Zimbabwe, and we traveled to Zimbabwe, and his family is they are some important characters in the first part of the book, and so it was very important to me that he felt that I had drawn them accurately and represented them well. So getting his support was huge. My kids didn't read the book until much later. So my elder son read it in galleys, right? So before it was published, but once it was done. And it was that was a really interesting experience. It was hard for him, but hard in a way that he really sort of embraced. He wanted that. He wanted to know more about my dad. He wanted to know more about me. I don't think he expected to feel connected to my dad, but at the so yes, the answer is yes, there were hard conversations. And at the very end of them, what he came away with was, he said, I think I am a lot like your dad and a lot like my dad. And that was a really interesting analysis for him to come away with. And I'd never expected him to identify with my dad, but he does, and he still does. He is tall. He's not 6'3", but he is 6'1". There are other things about him that are, sort of physical features that he shares with my dad, and he's a writer. So he's not wrong. I'm also really glad that he is also a lot like his dad, my husband, who is, who is just one of the best people on the planet. And so he's going to be okay. But yeah, some difficult conversations for sure.
Has your younger son read it, and does he know about it, I guess?
You are tricky. I was trying to just sneak away without answering that one. My younger son absolutely knows about it, and says he's not ready to read it yet. He very sweetly said that if there were ever an audiobook, he might listen to it. And I'm happy to report that there now is an audiobook, but I don't think he's downloaded it yet. So that's very sweet. I think actually the audiobook might be harder for him than reading it, because I narrate it, and that just might be kind of intense. But he says he's not quite ready yet, and that's fine with me. Not until he is ready does he need to read it. So, and that may not ever happen, and that would be okay too. But he knows all the secrets.
Oh, okay.
He knows everything that he knows everything that I came away with. He just hasn't read the book. Yes, there are no longer any secrets in this house, for sure.
Susan says, thank you. Thank you so much for your heartfelt answer. She appreciates it. And I do too. I think that this is a tricky family situation just as much as it is a tricky personal situation.
Yeah.
And how are we going to raise our kids to do better if we can't explain to them these lofty concepts and have these tough conversations with them now? And I think it speaks to you and your husband's relationship with them that you're able to do that. That's huge.
Thank you.
It's not easy with kids.
No, but it's the best. The kids are the best.
Does anybody else have a question? If you'd like, please feel free to unmute or take off or turn on your camera. I'll pause here for a second. I'm not going to ask another question. I don't want to speak over anybody again. I feel bad earlier. Or you can also use the chat function. And once again, guys, if you would like to read this book and you haven't yet, please toadbooks.com, any one of our 3 locations, your local library. It will be right in the front with all the new nonfiction. And if it hasn't been checked out yet, and you really should read it. It's an exemplary work. I currently am
That's very sweet.
I'm still in the first 5 or 6 chapters, but I'm enjoying it a lot. I think that your writing is exemplary, obviously, and it's hard stuff to think about and hard stuff to talk about. And I admire you for doing that. If you had to leave a piece of advice for
Mm.
other people who are not necessarily in the same position as, I have to reconcile this my entire life with this thing that I just learned about my family, but with our own perceptions of legacy, with the things that our parents have said and done, and the things that we carry somehow. If you had to leave a piece of advice for people who are trying to understand it and move forward from it, what would you leave them?
Um, I think, a lot of people asked when I was writing if the experience was cathartic, and I didn't quite understand how to answer the question when it came to me when I was in the process, because it didn't feel cathartic, right? It didn't feel like I was sort of working through something in order to solve it. If that's even, I don't even know if that's the definition of catharsis, but it didn't feel like I was kind of getting anywhere. I was just doing the work because I sort of felt like I had to do the work. And in order to do the work, I also had to compartmentalize. And your question about advice, I don't know if this is advice, but like learning how to compartmentalize was useful to me when I was writing the really difficult stuff. And I think I talk about that in the chapter that I read, like I definitely felt like I had to sort of put on a mask, which is ironic because now we're all wearing masks all the time, but a different kind of mask when I had had a hard day at this task, and then my kids would come home. I felt very much like I had to kind of shape up so that they wouldn't notice. But so that was sort of, so it didn't feel cathartic necessarily, but the advice I think that I would give is just to say that this journey we're all on, figuring out where we come from, matters just as much as sort of figuring out where we're going. And I think it was Faulkner who said, the past isn't dead, it's not even past, right? And so certainly for young writers who might feel like they don't have a story to tell, which I felt for forever, to sort of look in the rearview mirror a little bit, figure out where you come from, figure out who your people were, because that story may resonate today in ways that you don't know. So I don't know if that's good advice, but that and compartmentalizing.
Yeah, I appreciate the very human approach to in which you write about your dad, and you write about the realities of what he did and what he thought and what he put down on paper, and who he was as a person, who you remember him as, who your family remembers him as, and who others remember him as. And I think that remembering that humanity is important.
Yeah.
It's really, folks, please read this book, please. It's so beautiful in so many ways. It's
Thank you.
It's so multifaceted. I loved it. I'm really enjoying it. Cecile asks, what other books have you written, or other works have you written, and what other genres have you written in?
Well, so The Bookkeeper is my first book, so this is the one. I am currently working on something which I think is fiction, which is fun for me. I didn't know I could do that. So that's new. But I don't have any, I am a freelance writer, and so I write a lot of other things, but not things you would probably come across. I work for a college magazine. And so unless you went to that college, you probably don't even care about reading the things that I write for them. So that's a sweet question. I hope there's something more coming someday. We'll see.
What do you enjoy to read in your spare time with all of these lovely books?
Oh my God, I'm reading so many things. So right now I'm in the middle of How Much of These Hills is Gold,
Ooh.
which is such a good book. What else have I read recently? I'm looking around. None of them are here. The Murmur of Bees. Did you guys hear about this book? Published in Mexico in like 2015, but just only recently translated into English. Another fantastic novel. What I've been doing, this is my pandemic read plan. Since March, I've only been reading books about previous bad times. So I've read books about slavery. I've read books about World War I and World War II, the Spanish Civil War. It's like we were talking about this before the event started, right? I need to remind myself that things have always been bad in various ways, and people find a way to get through them. So that's my pandemic read. Yeah, if anyone needs any really uplifting literature from World War I or World War II, just ask me. I've been reading it.
You know, it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah, we got to do it. But How Much of These Hills is Gold? I haven't finished it yet, but I didn't expect to like it. There was something about the voice in the very beginning that I wasn't too into, but it got me. It's pretty powerful.
I love grow on you like that.
Yeah.
It's so fun.
Mm-hmm.
What a great experience. I have not started that one yet, but it's I keep seeing it at work and I'm like, I should buy a copy.
You should
just read it. Now I will.
Yeah.
Virginia, again, I didn't quite get that title. How much what of gold?
How Much of These Hills is Gold?
Okay.
Yeah. It's a great one.
So you said reading about the war stories were uplifting?
No, I was joking when I said uplifting. No.
Okay. Yeah, I tend to shy away from the war stories and war movies or anything.
Yeah, no, I can't watch a war movie, but I have been, I think one of the first ones I read during this pandemic was A Soldier of the Great War, Mark Halpern, which I read in high school and came back to, and I don't remember it. I don't remember loving it in high school. I think I read it because my mom was reading it and she said it was a great book. But it had so much, that was my first one where I was like, okay, so this is what I'm doing. This is my pandemic plan. Reading these books from the past.
Andrea says that she is grateful for your bravery, your candidness, and your artistry, and for work on this topic at this time. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you all came out today.
I am too. This has been so lovely. Thank you so much for reading to
Julia.
And for chatting with us. Excuse me. Yes.
No, I was just saying thank you again. I'm going to have to go in a couple of minutes and really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for coming and thanks for asking questions.
Folks, it's the last 5 or so minutes. Does anybody else have any more questions before we wrap up?
No.
All right.
Okay.
Last chance to unmute your mic before I wrap up. I feel so badly. I didn't even realize. I was just like, brain is going. Folks, thank you so much for coming out. Julia, thank you again for reading to us, for putting this work of art out into the world for us to read and enjoy on our own time, and for spending an hour of your afternoon with us on this beautiful, beautiful day. Oh my goodness.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. It means a lot. Thank you for inviting me.
No, of course. Anytime you would like to come visit us up at the Toadstool, any one of us, please do. We're open.
Can't wait. Can't wait for the world to reopen.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
There's still beautiful things happening, and I think that you proved that with your writing, that even though
thank you,
trouble things in everybody's family life, there are still good things happening. You have an amazing family. You have a husband who's supportive and loves you, a great co-parent. You have 2 awesome kids. It's really, really, truly a wonderful thing to read about and to see face to face with you. So thank you so much for doing this with us. We've really enjoyed having you. I've really enjoyed chatting with you.
May I add one more thing? I do want to thank the author, but I also want to thank Toadstool for these Zoom chats or Zoom groups. And I was at Toadstool last week, and I mentioned it to one of the clerks how much I appreciated that, because I don't get out a whole lot. But these are amazing, and books that are planned to read as a result of this. So I want to thank Toadstool and everyone involved I think it's wonderful.
It is such a joy to be able to bring digital events to all of the people that come in and see us in store. I'm so glad, Julia, that you were able to make this work with us. And I am so appreciative of all of you for coming out for it. It is a joy for me as a bookseller, as a reader, as a book lover, and as somebody who loves her community. Thank you so much for supporting us. We're going to try our best to keep making this happen for you guys. All right, folks,
Yeah,
that
good
is
work.
all the time
Thank
we
you,
have.
Katrina.
Thank you, Julia. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you,
You
folks, so
too.
much for coming out. We'll see you all soon.
Okay, great. Bye.
Bye.